This week's Four Questions Journalist Spotlight is brought to you by Leff's Atlanta Media, Atlanta's best journalist database. Subscribe at leffsatlantamedia.com.
Welcome to another edition of our Four Questions Journalist Spotlight. We are talking today with Saba Long, who is the Executive Director of Atlanta Civic Circle. Good afternoon, Saba.
Great to see you, Mitch.
So I know what ACC is all about, but I think it's a great opportunity for you I want to have you give folks a little bit of ideas to what it's all about. And then I want to talk a little bit about your background and what kind of led you to being the executive director of this news organization. So let's start with, what is Atlanta Civic Circle?
Well, first, I just noticed your shirt, and I feel like I should have had on an ACC shirt. I'll take note of that for branding purposes. But Atlanta Civic Circle is a nonprofit news outlet, obviously based in Atlanta, where we cover the metro area, so not just the city, but the 10-county region. And what makes us different from every other news outlet is, one, we're local, we're independent, and we use a solutions-oriented lens. And so not just wanting to report on, hey, there's an issue with housing, which is one of our topic areas, right? But what are some solutions that policymakers, that stakeholders should be considering as they try to tackle the problem? That's one of the key differentiators between us and other news outlets.
And what's the frequency? How often are you guys putting up news stories and publishing?
Yeah, so we have two key reporters, and we also have some freelancers. And so I would say, on average, each reporter will do 2 to 3 stories a week. And so, it just depends. If there's something that is going to be more time intensive, we'd rather slow down and get it right rather than trying to just put stories out. And so for us, it's really about quality over quantity.
Okay. And just let folks know, who are the 2 reporters that are your full-time folks?
Yeah, so Sean Keenan, I'm sure that's a name that's familiar with people. Sean is relatively young. I don't even know if he's quite 30 yet, but he has had a pretty big career so far in Atlanta. I was previously at Creative Loafing, RIP, the Creative Loafing of the past. Then he went on to Curbed, and now he's at ACC. And so he covers housing primarily. And then our other reporter is someone we brought on about mid-year, also a young reporter named Kendall Glenn. And so he covers our democracy beat. And within that, he also covers something we really just discovered over the past 4 or 5 months. It was born out of a fellowship that we did, but it's a series called Labor, Democracy, and the Common Good. And through that, he's covering things like the labor movement that's happening in Metro Atlanta and Georgia. So Starbucks, for example, there's 2 Starbucks stores in Metro Atlanta that have voted to unionize. The Apple store at Cumberland Mall intended to unionize, but they decided to pull their vote. Amazon is obviously a big one. So he's covering those topics in addition to the broader democracy conversation.
That's a broad beat, I would think. It's a lot of great reporting that can be done on that, and democracy beat.
Right. I mean, so it's, we did a fellowship this year. We were part of an inaugural group of, I think, 21 newsrooms across the country. So newsrooms as big as the Texas Tribune. The other local Georgia newsroom who participated was WXIA, so Channel 11. And we just spent about a year looking at what's the right way to cover democracy and elections. All the newsrooms who participated was considered battleground states, right? And so how do you do political journalism in a way that is ethical, in a way that helps people understand what's really happening, rather than just saying, elected official A said this and their opponent said this, right? That doesn't really serve the consumer. And I think people are kind of just tired of the, he said, she said of politics. And so through this, we're just reimagining how we cover political and democracy news in a way that really serves the reader.
What's a good example of a story that you covered differently or better than, say, another media outlet? Not to call anybody out specifically.
Yeah, we won't call anyone out.
Yeah.
So I mentioned this labor series that we've been doing, right? And so one thing we did was we actually talked about the labor commissioner race, because that's one that a lot of people don't pay attention to, right? You pay attention to Senate, you pay attention to governor, and then everything else just kind of falls by the wayside. And then obviously president. But we kind of just walk through. Here's what the powers that a labor commissioner has. We spoke with a previous labor commissioner to help people understand, because that was going to be an open seat, right? And so we wanted to help folks understand the two people vying for the position and why it's a position they should pay attention to. Another one I would highlight is during the primaries of 2022, we spent a good amount of time talking to the libertarian candidates. And that's one that, traditionally libertarian and third-party candidates don't get much airtime, all right? But we recognize that just looking at the trends, both Georgia polls and national polls, a lot of people are kind of tired of the two-party system and they're looking for an alternative. And so through that, we said, well, why don't we talk to the libertarian candidates, help people see who they are, what are their policy positions, and just give them a little bit more airtime that they wouldn't ordinarily get.
Yeah, we were working with the Atlanta Press Club on their debate series, and the Press Club policy is, if you're on the ballot, you're invited to debates. So we had libertarian candidates for Senate and governor at the podiums, and Chase Oliver in particular really appreciated the opportunity. He came off the debate stage afterward. He looked at me and says, "How did I do?" I said, "I think you did great, for the most part." I didn't get into the politics of it with him, but
right. Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge, right? I mean, debates it's tough for a third party candidate, even on the debate stage. But Chase, I think, for what it's worth, they put the Senate race into a runoff, right? Although Chase Oliver said, "Don't blame me for being a Senate runoff." But the point still stands that I think it's important for people to hear from other candidates and glean from what they want to do and what their vision is. I mean, they're offering themselves up for public service for a reason.
Yeah, and I would, my kind of experience in reading what you guys have been writing and how you've been doing it is because you're not reporting on everyday story, the story every day, this, that, he said, she said, you're getting more in depth and a little more thoughtful introspection on a lot of these topics that some radio and a lot of TV they just can't do because they just don't have the time. You can't get that deep in a 30-second radio segment or a minute and a half TV segment. Even the AJC, different. They can get more in depth, but you can get more in depth than others can.
Right. Yeah, and that's the other thing I think we do that is different that I didn't mention before is data journalism, and so pairing the work that the reporters are doing with a data journalist who will actually work with them and say, okay, what information is out there that we could do an open records request on and find, this person that you've quoted in the story is saying X. But that's an anecdote in one sense, right? But the data is actually showing why, right? And so that gives the story more color, and it just helps people better understand, the underlying issues behind what they might be seeing beyond just so-and-so is experiencing difficulties with housing. Okay, but how is that really playing out?
Right. So sidebar, I'm gonna. You mentioned the shirt logo. So I'm gonna when I do the little post production here, I'll put your logo up in the corner.
Okay.
So it'll pop up there when people are talking. But I do want to give our viewers and listeners the website so that people can find you easily.
Yeah. So we are online at atlantacivicCircle.org. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. All at Atlanta. It's either ATL Civic Circle or Atlanta Civic Circle. No TikTok, but we're on the rest.
Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of waiting to see on TikTok. I've been playing with some of the other social media sites, Mastodon and
Yeah,
Post News, but
I have a Post News account, but I have not done anything with it.
yeah, I mean, I think I posted one post on it, and but I've been trying to find other friends and colleagues on there to connect with, and I haven't found a ton of folks on there yet. So we'll see. The question becomes, is there going to be a mass migration from Twitter or not? And I don't know. I think people
Yeah,
will
I'm not convinced that there will be, at least not right now.
Yeah. So if oh, before I get to, I want to talk about how companies can kind of help you and be a part of your reporting, but take a minute first and tell me a little about yourself, how you got to where you are as the executive director there.
A bit by accident. So I was on the board. So I was a board member of Atlanta Civic Circle, and we were having a board meeting, and we were actually doing this at a board member's house, and we were talking about the need to hire an executive director. We had someone sort of in the role, but not fully in the role. And we all each kind of came up with a list of names of people that we thought should be considered, just people in the Metro Atlanta community, people we thought would be a good fit. And so fast forward to at that meeting, one of the board members said, "Well, Saba, I think you should be the executive director." At the time, I was like, "Wait, what? No, that's not."
Yeah, that's what you get for showing up for meetings, right?
Right. So, my background is political communications, government communications, right? And so I've worked at City of Atlanta, I've worked at MARTA, I've worked on a number of political campaigns, civic projects. And so I know the fabric of the region pretty well. And as one reason why I joined the board in the first place is because, like you, I've worked next to journalists, right? And so I've always seen, just seeing the ebbs and flows in the region and kind of the local media landscape, and recognizing how important journalism is, and this was me just as a consultant, and recognizing how hard it is to find like quality journalists, to get the story right, like all those types of things. And so when, I kept thinking about it, like, does this really make sense to leave the consulting world and take on this project, take on a nonprofit startup, right? Not even just a nonprofit, but a startup nonprofit. But I said yes, and haven't looked back, and it's been a roller coaster, but it's been really fun.
That's great. And if folks want to offer expertise, if they think they could be a part of helping you report on some of these issues, would you suggest they go to one of the reporters or go through you? What's the best process there?
Yeah, I think it just depends, right? So sometimes, it could be a specific story that a reporter is just clearly already thinking about, and that, and you can kind of just see that based on how they're writing. Like, go pitch the reporter by all means. If it's something, especially if it's a one-off, right? But if it's something that you think is going to be more time intensive, it's going to take maybe a series, maybe something beyond just traditional, a story, but another way of telling the story beyond just written form, then by all means, feel free to come to me. I meet with folks a lot, and sometimes it leads to a story or a series, and sometimes it just informs our work. And so it's, I'm always here. I'm always available.
Yeah. So what's the best? Is email the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I'd probably say email. But I've had people, DM me on Twitter. I've had people who just know me call. But email for sure is always easy.
Okay. Are there, obviously we've gotten through the crazy last 4 or 5 years of elections. What's the next big story that you want to be focused on? Or I'm sure there's more than one, but
we're not done with elections. I hate to say it.
We're not done yet? Are we not done yet? Please tell me we're done for now.
No, you've got local elections in some parts of the region in 2023. 2024 obviously is going to be a huge year. 2026.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, we're not done on the elections front, but one thing, and again, this is kind of born out of that fellowship we did, is we're looking at, are people satisfied with who their candidates are, right? Who their options are to vote. One of the data stories we did around this election was that a number of the seats were already called, right? Yes, there was a Republican and a Democrat running, but the way the district is drawn, it's a safe R or a safe D. And so you don't really have a choice at the end of the day. Your choice is really only in the primary. And so we'll be continuing kind of coverage around that, coverage around voter engagement, civic engagement broadly, what's missing for people, right? And I think one thing, both Twitter and just kind of everything that's happening nationally and globally, there's a trust deficit that we're seeing, right, amongst each other, trust in institutions, trust in media, right? And so those are all things we're going to be exploring about how do we address that? How do we strengthen our connection to the Metro Atlanta community? How do we write stories that people actually care about and stories that really move the needle? We're not just writing the same thing day in and day out. So those are just some of the things that we'll be focused on in 23 and beyond.
Yeah, that's a great point about the districting. Because I don't think people quite realize that. I mean, I look at the 14th congressional district, for example, and that winds its way all the way down from Chattanooga to Cobb County. It's crazy how far that goes, but it is an R, as you said. It's an R.
Right.
I mean, I have a good friend in Rome. I said, "Which way is this going to go?" He's like,
There's only one way
it's going to go. It's going to go. It's going to go R.
Right.
Democrats not going to win in the 14th district, and not right now.
Right.
That's a whole nother topic of that. That's a whole.
That was. I actually I was on WABE and we were talking about that race, and I just thought it was nutty for Democrats to put so much money in a race that they absolutely had no shot of winning. But again, that's a topic for another day.
Well, yes, that we can have a longer conversation about that.
Right.
I was at all those debates and talked up both of those candidates in the final election. So it's yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
well,
so
you'll do your version of overtime. You know how Bill Maher has overtime. There's
right. Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. I could write a book about how some of the candidates behaved when the cameras were off versus what they turned into when the lights went on.
Right.
It was fascinating to watch. All right, so let's jump now into the more challenging question. So the hardest question I always ask for these things is, what is something cool or fun about you that folks might not know? And it could be a hobby or a talent or things you collect or anything kind of fun and cool about that.
Oh, yeah, that is tough because
what's cool about Saba?
I don't know how cool or fun I am.
Go ahead. Throw it out there.
Yeah, geez. I don't know. This is so lame sounding, but on conference calls, if I'm off camera, I can't believe I'm actually going to admit this, but if it's a conference call and I'm off camera, I'm playing Oculus VR table tennis.
That's cool. That's awesome. All right.
I'm paying attention, but I'm just, it's just like sometimes you're just on a call and I get fidgety and feel like I need to do something.
I tend to doodle a lot when I'm on calls like that. Although I do find that if I have too many screens up and running, that I do not pay attention to one Zoom call as much as I should. But I won't admit that to anyone in particular about that.
Right.
All right. So last book you've read or the last podcast you've listened to?
I have probably 5 books on my nightstand, so none of them are completed. But they're all in various stages. But last podcast, I listen to a podcast probably every day. Let's see. I think the last podcast was probably either the daily or one I've been listening to called War on the Rocks, which has become more interesting during the whole Ukraine-Russia debacle.
Mm-hmm.
But Yeah. I mean, I listen to, I don't know, easily 10 or so podcasts.
Favorite local restaurant?
Oh, that's tough. It really depends on my mood. There's not one. There's probably like one in each quadrant of the city.
All right, pick one within 5 miles of you. How about of where you are right now? How about that?
Okay, Rumi's.
Movie. Okay. All right. Favorite guilty pleasure?
Mm, hanging out really late with friends when I have something to do at 8 a.m.
All right. Favorite local getaway?
Define local.
Uh, Georgia. How about that? Let's say Georgia.
Probably Serenbe.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. All right. And favorite non-work hobby?
What does not work? I'm just kidding.
That sounds like a Jeopardy question. What is
Right, right.
what is not work?
Um, I'll tell you something I do like to do is it's a bit of a self-care thing is I go to the sauna pretty regularly.
Okay. That's a good one. All right. Anything else about ACC that we haven't talked about that you want to drop in? And I'll put the links in
Okay.
the
Yeah.
notes and all that.
Just I think this is a really exciting time for nonprofit journalism broadly. There's a lot of changes and shifts happening in in the industry itself, and we're paying attention to that, and we're really thinking through. January 2023 will be 2 full years of the site launching, and so now we're on the pathway of okay, how do we become a sustainable organization? I'm in the middle of a fellowship right now at UNC through their journalism school to help us think through that. And so really it's about, we're excited about the future of nonprofit journalism in Metro Atlanta, telling stories that people want to hear, people want to pay attention to, but there's just a lack of opportunity being able to access or read those stories. And I think we're going to do a lot more convening going forward. I think there's a recognition that just putting a story online or just putting a story on social media alone is not going to cut it for news outlets. And they've just like companies have to get creative about getting their product in front of consumers. The same thing is happening in the news industry. And so we're really looking at how do we do that?
Very good. Thank you. All right. We've been talking with Saba Long, who is the executive director of Atlanta Civic Circle. Thank you very much, Saba, for being with us. And as always, if you're watching this on YouTube, click that subscribe button because I'm like 98% of the away from actually, getting to where I want to be. And if you're listening, share this with your friends. If you are looking for our database of local media, go to leffsatlantamamedia.com. And if you're a journalist looking for sources, go to mitchesmediamatch.com or as always, just give me a call. Thank you, Saba, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mitch.